senior PhD student in the biological engineering department, and both of us are the co-chair of the Committee on Scholarly Interaction, or CoSI for short. I'll let Georgia introduce CoSI.
Thanks, Wen. So we are excited to have you here for the third lecture of this semester. We'd like to invite speakers that are from the MIT community or outside to come talk about a topic that they're passionate about and that you can get excited about and engage in a discussion with them. So we're really excited to have someone here today that will talk about entrepreneurship and innovation. And before we begin, we'll ask Julie to introduce him. And Julie is the Associate Housemaster here at Sydney Pacific, and she's also a professor in the Aeronautics Department. So let's introduce Julie.
We are delighted today to welcome Bill Aulet. He's the director of the Martin Trust Center for Entrepreneurship at MIT. And their goal is to provide students at MIT the resources, the training, the mentorship to be able to commercialize the technology that you develop. There is arguably no better place in the country or the world to do this, and this is in large part to the outstanding leadership that Bill has brought in his role. He has conceived, designed, and helped implement a number of new innovation programs, the MIT Clean Energy Prize, the Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program, the Founder Skills Accelerator, just to name a few. He came to MIT after 25 years with a highly successful track record in business. He directly raised more than $100 million in funding for his own companies and led to the creation of hundreds of millions of dollars in market value for these companies. He teaches a number of classes in entrepreneurship at MIT and was just last year awarded the Adolph Monison Prize for Entrepreneurship Mentoring at MIT. Finally, he has literally written the book on the topic, Disciplined Entrepreneurship, 24 Steps to a Successful Startup. We are absolutely delighted to welcome you to Sydney Pacific.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Julie. It's an honor to be here. Wow, what a nice place this is. Can you hear me in the back? You can probably hear me without this. Yes, this is an iPhone 6 Plus. And I won't sit on it to show you that it actually doesn't break. That's just not true. I've done it a few times. So, how many of you are engineers here? How many of you are from the School of Science? School of Management? And then Humanities, Arts, and Social Science. There's no hospital. Wow, that's scary. All right, so what I'm going to talk about is entrepreneurship, and I have, how long do we have? What?
We have half an hour.
Half an hour. Yeah, I would love to get a lot of questions. So if you have questions even before then, just shout them out. And I'm going to go through and just talk about MIT and entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship is this incredibly cool thing right now. Just like in the past 5 years when I've been running the center, we've gone from being kind of those crazy people over there, just leave them alone, to now President Reif, Marty Schmidt, Ian Wade, Dave Schmidtline, they come over and see us, they call up, and not only that, we have prime ministers come over and visit, we have Mayor Bloomberg come visit, we have Sam Zell come visit us, we have the White House wants to know what we're doing. It's kind of weird that we went from being these kind of pirates to being kind of in the Navy in a very short period of time. And the question is, kind of how did that happen? So when I graduated from college in 1980, yes, I am that old. You're supposed to say you don't look that old. Can someone please say that? Nobody was an entrepreneur. To say you were an entrepreneur meant you were unemployed. And today, 20% of the people at Harvard and Yale say they want to be entrepreneurs. If you go to Quebec, 25% of the young people want to be entrepreneurs. If you go to Georgia Tech, it's 33%. At MIT, it's 150%. You've got to start more than one company if you're really an entrepreneur. So we've gone in this period of entrepreneurship being statistically zero to being this very cool thing. And the reasons why are it's are pretty simple. Does anybody know what the reason is? It's a 4-letter word. Free. No.
Job.
That's right. Not Steve Jobs, but jobs. Because the jobs that are being created are not being created by big companies. They're not being created by the government. They're being created by new companies. So everyone in this room will probably work for an innovation-driven startup at some point in their life. And if you don't, your kids certainly will, if you have kids. That's just the way the world's going. It's almost impossible not to work at a startup. I should have asked how many of you work with startups. But so entrepreneurship is now this off-the-charts thing. Governments, even the UK, is embracing entrepreneurship at the government level. But people don't really understand it. The first lesson you learn in engineering is to define your terms. What do we mean by entrepreneurship? And the interesting thing is entrepreneurship is that if you listen to Romney and Obama in the last campaign, like they both were saying the word entrepreneurship, but they meant different things. What Romney was talking about is he was talking about what they call SME, small medium enterprises. These small companies, they make up the lion's share of the employment. And what Obama was talking about was innovation-driven enterprises or innovation-driven entrepreneurship. And these are two different things. When someone says, "Oh, my friend's an entrepreneur," they might, have a trading, or they might have a salon, or they might have a dry cleaner, or they might have a restaurant, or they might have a service company that services computers in a small area. That's a local business. That's a trading business. That's an SME. That's a small business that's dealing with a local demand. That is a good business, but it's not a high-growth business. The economy needs these businesses, but those are not what we do at MIT. What we do at MIT is we do innovation-driven businesses. And these are ones that look at global markets. There's some underlying innovation where they can sell this to any place. It's that good. And so people say, well, what's the difference? When you think about policy, when you think about training people for this, it's much different than training people for this. This system over here responds, we're going to lose some at the bottom, responds very quickly to stimulus. If I put money into it, I can create jobs. If you put money into these go down and then they come up. It takes a while for the system to respond, but when it responds, it can respond with exponential growth. These have linear growth that kind of taps out at some point. Yes, a J curve. So you think about cash flow. The cash flow will go down, and then over time it would come back up and be very, very positive, right? These, on the other hand, would kind of be more linear in growth. They might start lower because you spend money to begin, but then they're just going to kind of linear growth. But these are more like your family businesses and things like that. These are more like what you see at MIT, high growth. Yes, sir?
Where would high growth non-technology businesses fit in? I mean, it seems that things like Walmart or FedEx are some of the biggest growth stories in the last 40 years outside of technology, and they don't seem to
Did I use the word technology?
No, you didn't. I suppose. Okay.
That's exactly my point. Is that when I first started, the head of the center used to say, "Why do you refer to it as innovation-driven entrepreneurship? It's technology-driven." Remember, Bill, this is MIT. Don't bring that. I went to Harvard, and he thinks it's just the funniest thing in the world that I have an engineering degree from Harvard, which he reminds me of every day. He doesn't think that Harvard's accredited to give them out. So he's forever hassling me about things like this. He says, this is MIT, we do technology. And I point out just what you did. It's innovation that is what matters. And innovation can be technology, it can be business model, it can be process, it can be positioning. It's a new to the world idea that people then implement. And you're absolutely right. Walmart is about logistics. It's a technology. Salesforce.com. At the end of the day, is Google a technology company? And many would argue that it is. I would argue that it is not. What is Google? Is Google a search engine company? What is it?
Advertising.
It's an advertising. It's the world's greatest advertising company ever. And that advertising innovation was the use of AdWords, which is really a business model innovation. So it's not about their algorithm. Yes?
So when you talk about jobs, at least in my opinion, a lot of these IDE companies, the revenue per employee is extremely high. And when we talk about, especially you mentioned politics before, SMEs, people say, are creating the actual jobs, whereas like IDE companies, because your revenue per employee is so high that it's not actually creating so many jobs.
So that's a really good point. A lot of these you get driven, and this is Andy McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson's point, is the productivity skyrocketing over here and these things. Are they actually creating the jobs? And that's their point. But when you look at the data, what's happening with the data is, and when SME goes, you put another SME in. So there's not net growth. Between 1980 and 2005 in the US economy, 40 million net new jobs were created. 40 million net new jobs. Now, I'll come back to that number. That's 25 years, 40 million jobs. What percent of them do you think were created by big companies? Net jobs, right? That's essentially zero. Essentially zero by the government. Were they started by SMEs? No, essentially zero. Almost, according to the Aulet Foundation, almost every single net new job was started not by small companies, but by companies that were 5 years old or less. All the growth comes from new companies, not small companies, new companies. So in answer to your question, could they create more jobs? The answer is yes, if you want to make them less productive. But if they're productive, then they're going to be more competitive. And now, Brynjolfsson and Andy would say, well, where does that lead?
I mean, is it basically like a wedge between the people who are like technically talented or have like skilled labor versus like kind of this SME, and then is there this huge?
The answer to that is yes, but that's not the point of my presentation. And I'm not an expert on that, but the data is pretty clear on that. We're getting a society that gets stratified. But I'm not supposed to talk about politics or here. But just to put that in perspective, just to, for a little commentary here, we created 40 million net new jobs in 25 years in the United States in a reasonable period of growth. In the Middle East and North Africa, to keep unemployment where it is today, which is not a happy place, but just keep it where it is today. Does anybody want to guess how many new jobs we need to create? 40 million would be a lot of jobs to create in that area, wouldn't it? We need to create 70 million net new jobs because the youth of that population is coming onto the market. And who's going to create those jobs? It's not going to be the government. It's not going to be Saudi Aramco. This is, we'll get back to talking about this maybe at the end, but our understanding of entrepreneurship is not something we should hoard to ourselves. We need to export this as fast as we can to the rest of the world because jobs need to be created everywhere. And if we don't, those problems will come home to roost right here or wherever we are. I don't mean to get political here, but the creation of jobs is why every government in the world is so interested in entrepreneurship. So these two things, while they're both entrepreneurship, it's like saying basketball and soccer are both sports, so let's just train you for both of them at the same time. These are both kind of entrepreneurship and both involve running and jumping and keeping score. But guess what? These are two different sports, like basketball and soccer. If we want to train you for this, we would talk about family businesses, franchising, a whole different set of things. When we train you for this, we're talking about how do you raise equity financing, how do you think about high growth, international markets, all these types of things. It's a different type of discipline over here. Now the question then is can you teach entrepreneurship? And that is a question that I didn't used to think you could, and I still have people, and if we had time, I'd ask people in this room, who believes you can? And some people would say, oh, you can't teach entrepreneurship. You're born to be an entrepreneur. There's no data to support that, just so we're clear. There's no data to support that. There's no data that people said, well, if your parents were entrepreneurs, you're more likely to be an entrepreneur. There's no data to support that. There's no data to support that if your parents were an entrepreneur, that you're more likely than somebody else to be an entrepreneur like me, who my parents weren't entrepreneurs at all. Here's what the data shows, is that the first time you're an entrepreneur, your odds of success are like this. The second time, your odds of success are much higher. The third time, your odds of success are much higher. That's exactly what happened to me. The first time, my company did not succeed. Second time, succeeded. Third time, succeeded much, much more. And that's what the data shows over and over again. Is that surprising now that I tell you that? The answer is no. Because if you play sport, it's the same when you do something a lot of times. This is something that can be learned. It's not like there's some gene or some magic here. There is something that you learn. The question isn't, can you teach it? The question is, how do you teach it? How do you teach entrepreneurship? To simulate that experience, how people get better. Do you do that in a classroom? Do you do it outside of a classroom? How do you do that? And we talked about, of course, why you have to do this. So this is the problem of how do you do it. And here's the issue today, is that the demand for entrepreneurship is skyrocketing. There are over 2,000 universities that are teaching entrepreneurship today. The demand is just huge going from where we were. The problem is that the supply of entrepreneurship education doesn't scale. And this is a dirty little secret that I think we all need to be aware of. Well, can't we just teach entrepreneurship like we teach math or physics? Let's train some people and put them out there. And the answer is no, you can't. Because if we teach math, the equations are the same no matter where you are. If I teach Java programming, it's the same. But if we're going to teach entrepreneurship, what's your company do, Wayne?
We do an offline, online social networking app that allows people to help one another.
Yes. And she's doing an energy storage company, and you're doing an enterprise software, and you're doing a new fashion company, and you're doing a medical device company. How in the world can we handle all these different types of context between them? It is a very, very hard problem. And it's not a situation where you can just give problem sets out, even if it is different, and say solve them, because there's experiential. You don't just learn in a classroom. And here's the other part of it that was really kind of shocking to me. To find tenure-track faculty members who are really good at entrepreneurship is super hard. It's really, really hard. And we could go through why that is, but let me just tell you what the answer is. Because the goal in academia is to get tenure. And if you want to get tenure, what do? You publish, and you publish rigorous stuff based on data sets. Data sets that you can correlate. If any of you have ever been in a startup, the data is all over the place. And if I want to compare it from my company to your company to your company, it is virtually impossible. So if I want to get tenure, I'm going to go to where the data is. I'm going to go to look at study financing things or marketing at Procter & Gamble or something else like that. It's very, very hard to get good tenure-track people in entrepreneurship. And I can tell you that because we have openings and we have a really hard time finding people. And you are extremely fortunate because the two best places in the world for tenure, for rigorous entrepreneurship are right in Cambridge. It's at MIT and it's at Harvard. And we can't scale it. We are just, it's really, really hard. Some of you are in the classes now, and some of you can take our classes. Those classes used to be 20 people when I came in, teaching. Now they're like 200 people, per semester. And it's very hard to scale that. And that's at MIT. Imagine if you're at, Nebraska or something like that. Nothing against Nebraska. How do they do that? How do they do that? They don't. So what happens is you get, by the way, the other thing about it is it's easy to fake entrepreneurship education. It's easy to fake it. I've done it. Before I taught at MIT, and I had rigorous MIT faculty members breathing down my neck as to how to do it. I would just go in and tell stories about how, it's like basketball, and what you need to do is wake up early in the morning and try harder than the other person, and know their weaknesses, and accept failure. Just a whole bunch of bullshit like that. But people be inspired, they run off. And yes?
How the growth of accelerators?
Growth of accelerators?
Combinator and all those.
Can we take that in the Q&A? Let me just set the stage, because that's a really good question. And I've written about that. So what fills this gap here is storytelling, this fake it. And if you, now that you know this, you go out and think about what entrepreneurship, quote, education you had, or the last conference you've been to. And it's a bunch of cliched, stuff. And the classic one of this is the Donald Trump. Because this is a multi-billion-dollar gap right here. This is a multi-billion-dollar gap. They run entrepreneurship conferences. They charge people $5,000 to hear a bunch of people telling stories and a bunch of unrigorous BS. And the classic one was Donald Trump. Seeing an opportunity, opened up an entrepreneurship institute. You paid thousands of dollars to go to his entrepreneurship institute. And what did he do? He came in and told you some stories, and then some other people tell you some stories, and then they put you into a Shark Tank. I mean, is that really going to help you? And then they literally, the third part of the program was they had brought someone in to sell you real estate. So that is absurd. But how absurd is it when you look at the next entrepreneurship conference where they're charging $2,000 and see what you're really getting out of that? What you are getting is one thing that can be good, and that is inspiration. And we'll talk about what MIT is great at, but to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to have the spirit. You need to have this willingness to, if all the fish are swimming this way, will you swim that way? And this is inherent in MIT. This is what other people don't get. At MIT, we give out pirate certificates. We do all kinds of fun stuff, including a hacking museum. The rest of the world calls what we do, I don't know if any of you saw this. I thought this was hysterical. I think MIT's been the #1 university in the world for 3 years in a row. Does anyone know? It's either 2 or 3 years. 2 or 3 years. And the Guardian, I was in London, and they were astounded that MIT, first of all, we're not a university, so it's pretty funny we're named the #1 university. And then they were trying to understand why MIT was for a second year in a row, and they said because they have this thing called creative irreverence. But we don't call it creative irreverence. What do we call it? Hacking. But for the rest of the world, hacking is some criminal behavior. Here at MIT, we have etiquettes of hacking from the dean, we have a museum, we have books celebrating it, right? And this is the pirate mentality, and that's important. And that's what we need to keep. And when I told, when I realized that, I was telling the faculty, they kind of got it, but I said we need to celebrate this. This is what makes us great at entrepreneurship. It's not. But it's insufficient to just have the spirit. We need to give them the skills. So, do I have 10 minutes left? So how entrepreneurship should be taught should be clearly, it should be open sourced. It should not be any one person is the guru of this. And this is the problem with entrepreneurship, as I'll show you in a second. There's the fad of the year or 2 years. Right now it's lean startup and pivoting. And before that it was crossing the chasm, and before that it was something else. And we throw out everything else and act crazy. But we should have an open source knowledge base that everybody can contribute to. But it is tested in a rigorous way using academics, but it's also practitioners. Just like in medicine, you have researchers and practitioners working together, and you have this thing called translational research. Entrepreneurship is just developing, and we don't have that yet. And so we're susceptible to these fads of ideas and books that come out. And I'll show you that. But we have to understand it's a complicated system to build a new venture. There's no one single answer. This is not a problem set to do this. It's a complicated system with many first, second, third, fourth, fifth order relationships that we need to understand. And so we need to do that in an integrated way. So after thinking about this for a long time, said, look, the analogy is we need to build a toolbox. And we need to stop obsessing. And so if we're going to build a house, we would have a toolbox, and we would think of all the tools that we need. And if all of a sudden along came a new tool, a ratchet, that's a great tool. But that is just one new tool to add to our toolbox, and we wouldn't use it until we've tested it out. Now that's perfectly logical, but that's not the way the world has worked in entrepreneurship. Because the world in entrepreneurship has been Whatever the new book is, forget everything else. This is the new single answer to entrepreneurship. And that is not a way to build a discipline. And when we're going back to the beginning, if we want to have 20% of our people thinking of entrepreneurship as a career option, like being a lawyer, like being an accountant, we need to build up a body of knowledge that's rigorous and practical for them to use. And so all these things have good ideas in them, but how do we pull them together and how do we test them? And these are some of the people. This is Fiona Murray, this is Ed Roberts, this is Scott Stern, this is Matt Marks. These are all leading edge people in the world in entrepreneurship thinking. Ed wrote the first book on it. Scott Stern was named the Kauffman first medal award winner in excellence in research in the area. Matt Marks was the one who did the work to eliminate non-competes with real data to show that non-competes actually hurt the economy. And Fiona Murray is a renowned scientist who did the work on how do you build how did the biotech ecosystem happen here? And she heads up the innovation initiative. So these are people like that I teach with, and when I go in to teach and I have something, I'll go, we're going to do this, and this is how it works. And then like Fiona will look at me and say, that's very nice, Bill. She has a British accent, so it all sounds very nice. And she says, this is very nice, Bill, but where's the data? And that basically says, that's bullshit, Bill. You're not going to teach that here at MIT until you have more proof of that this is true. And while that's painful, that is exactly what the field needs. That's exactly what the field needs. I don't know how many of you know Brad Feld. You know Brad Feld? So I'm talking to Brad Feld, and Brad goes, oh, you're there. Do you work with Ed Roberts? Because Brad was getting his PhD here. He goes, that guy used to torment me all the time. And I said, that's in the past tense for you, Brad. It's in the present tense for me. But that is what the field needs. If we're going to take this seriously, that's what the field needs. But at the other hand, we have to make it accessible. So let me just show you what we've done for disciplined entrepreneurship. Because we put together what we call disciplined entrepreneurship, 24 steps to launching a successful product. Now the book calls it 24 steps to a successful startup, but that's because they wanted to simplify it and sell more books. They also wanted to change the name from disciplined entrepreneurship to make it sound like, they didn't like that because that made it sound too easy. I would not compromise on that, but the other one was that. But what you have here is you have a place to start and a place where you get to an end point. And if I tell you all about entrepreneurship, the question is, where do I start? Where do I start? And the question, and here, the point where you start is with the customer. You don't start with the technology. You don't start with how much does it cost. You don't start with a prototype. All those things, people have said, that's what you do. That's not what you do. Now, you can do that and you could succeed. But your odds of success are very unlikely. So in this is a framework that helps you think about how do you start. Because the single necessary and sufficient condition for a business is a paying customer. You need to figure out how do you get customers. This is a business. And so this is called user-driven design. This is nothing new. This is what Eric von Hippel has been working on here at MIT for a long time. This is what IDEO has been using. This is a proven technique. And this is what we incorporate in, and we go through each step and define each term and tell you how to do it and give you cases to how to do it. Is this absolutely perfect? No. Is it better than anything else I've ever seen out there? By far. Will it get better in the future? I sure hope so, because it's supposed to be open source. But now we have a framework and common language and structure in which to work through. So you see, who's your customer? Then this red part is, what can I do? What can you do for your customer? And each step is very methodical. And then here, so when some of you are taking the course, and you actually like those first ones. Who's your customer? We build personas, we understand what they're doing. And then they do, what can you do for your customer? What's your value proposition? What's your secret sauce? All that. And then we get to this nasty part of, how does your customer acquire the product? And this isn't fun, especially at MIT. But you don't have a business unless you understand how your customer acquires their product. Because they don't just get it because it's good. You have to understand why they would buy it. And if you understand that, then you can calculate, are you going to make money off your product? Because you have to understand if that's how they buy the product, how are we going to extract rent for the value that we create? And then that gets to, you know, a pricing estimate and then the lifetime value. So if we start this business and a social network, how much is one new customer worth to him? Well, it's worth about $1,000. Is that good or is that bad? Depends. It depends how much it costs for me to acquire a new customer. So when I was at IBM, it would cost us $1 million to get a new customer. That seems like a lot. Not until you understand that the lifetime value of a customer we got at IBM was like $10 million. Then you understand this is a great business. So we go through all these unit economics, and then we get to how do you build the product. And the catch here is, we as engineers, myself as a fake engineer, but as engineers, we love to build stuff. And that's a dangerous thing to do too quickly. Because if you build stuff, you start advocating for what you've built, and you're no longer in inquiry mode. And to make a successful startup, you have to think not of what you think is best, but you have to understand what the customer's needs are and then build the product for them. And if you don't do that, your odds of success are much, much lower. You're not asking the customer to design the product. That's your job. But you have to understand the customer's needs, wants, all those types of things. Then you have to understand how they buy the product. Then you design the product, figure out how you're going to price the product, how you're going to extract rent, should it be a one-time charge, licensing, all that. And then now down here, we efficiently and effectively build this using rapid experimentation, small rapid experiments early on. And this is kind of the whole lean startup, which was actually studied by a guy named Stefan Tomke here at MIT, who's now at Harvard, in a very, very rigorous way. So it does work. And then how do we scale the business? And that's essentially what this is all about. There are lots of iterations in here. People say, why can't you just make it simpler? Can't we do this in 4 steps? And no, you can't. Entrepreneurship is not easy. But if you do it, it's wonderful. If you get it right, it's wonderful. I can tell you stories about one of them, Britt Markle, who is now doing avalanche detection, was just featured in the Financial Times earlier this week. I don't know if any of you saw the article. There's no one having more fun in the world right now than Britt Markle. He has built technology with other people from MIT here, not Scott Sundborg, but he's built technology with other people, and they now can detect when avalanches happen. It's a great business. He's out there changing the world. We have Billikis, who just got from Africa. She's doing recyclers. By the way, this says you go to this. This discipline entrepreneurship is relevant if you're doing social entrepreneurship, if you're setting up an NGO. You want to be disciplined about how you approach it. She is working out to clean up Lagos, Nigeria, by building bicycles that kids go around and pick up rubbish or garbage, and then bring it, sort it out, and take it to recyclers. So she's cleaning up the city, creating jobs for people, and creating energy when she takes it back. You have Ella Panovich, who is empowering women in Africa by having them use their cell phones when they create jewelry to sell it directly to people in the United States, eliminating the middleman. Middle people, I should say. And then that gives the women in Africa more money for what they do. It empowers them. It gives people in the United States something they can buy at a lesser price and a connection to people over there. And it's changing the world. So I could go on and on, but I'll try not to. We'll do that in the Q&A, we'll brag about our kids. So it's comprehensive, but it's practical. Yes?
So just a question on your customer-based sort of model of entrepreneurship. So let's say you define your customer base to be certain demographic, right?
Yeah.
Don't you think that sort of limits the kind of innovation that you do? I mean, one example, I mean, this may not be an entrepreneurial example, but one example is Nokia, the phone manufacturer. So when Nokia started out, it sort of focused a bunch of its products on the developing countries, which meant that it never innovated to making smartphones early enough. And by the time it started doing it, Apple and Samsung, which is the Android sort of flagship devices, flagship platform, they took over the cell phone market, and now Android is everywhere. So So do you think, so when you sort of fix your target customer, don't you think that limits your ability to innovate?
So we could dive a lot more into Nokia,
Okay.
because they did something right when they went in and did the developing world.
Yeah.
Now, what the next move was, we could argue about a lot. But the problem is when you're a startup, all right, you don't have a lot of resources. You're an attacker. You don't have a lot of resources. You're going up against very big people. You're going up against Google, IBM, Microsoft, Procter & Gamble. And you have to be much more, you have to be more clever. And you can't just try to beat them on all sides. You have to pick one area, concentrate your resources, and win one market. It's called a beachhead market. So if I'm trying to overcome some big force that has, this was, when the Nazis had Europe, we didn't try to attack on all sides. We picked one part, we came in, got the beachhead at Normandy, won that, and then you expand out from there. Now that's the question when you go back to this, how do you do that systematically? So to your point is, this picking a beachhead market and focusing on one market first and winning it has shown time and time again to be the best way for entrepreneurs to succeed. Now the next move after that, so what I always talk about in class, and some of you have heard this already, is if I'm trying to catch 5 rabbits at one time, I'll catch none of them. But if I focus on one rabbit, I'll catch one rabbit. Even if I try to catch 2, I'll catch none. I just got to get one rabbit, and then once I figure that out, then I'll get another rabbit. And you don't go for the biggest market first, by the way. You go for the easiest one for you to capture. So if you look back, Nokia, I can't talk as much about. I can talk about Apple. Why is Apple successful? Apple's successful because they have a very focused beachhead market with the Macintosh. The Macintosh did not try to compete head-on with the IBM. It did one thing and did it well. And it was actually one application that it did well. And I don't know if anybody knows what it was. Does anybody remember? Word. Forget it. No, it wasn't Word. You all are too young.
Was it Excel?
That's right. It wasn't Adobe. It was actually Aldus PageMaker. They did one thing, and it was Aldus PageMaker, and they did desktop publishing. There was no desktop publishing industry until the Macintosh did that. The Macintosh could not compete against IBM. I was at IBM at the time, and they could not compete. They picked one market. They didn't actually. Aldus did, which is why Jobs hated Adobe in part. And they did desktop publishing, and it just blew our minds. How can these churches, how can these PTA groups create newspapers? We couldn't do that on multi-million-dollar mainframe computers, but because they were addressing pixels on the screen, and we were efficiently putting characters up on the screen, they could do desktop publishing. Then every company, everyone who was a creative person got, not everyone, many creative people got Macintoshes. And then they upgraded from the oldest paper, they kept that, then they got Core. Then they started adding other creative things, and you see this over and over again. Then they own the creative professional. If you look back at Sun Microsystem, they got in with CASE, Computer-Aided Software Engineering, and then they became the engineer's workstation. So this pattern, I mean, you can see it, if you get a chance to look at the book, you'll see this pattern over and over again. So it's a recognized way. Now you could possibly just get lucky and do something, and that's called a platform play. But your odds are very, very low, especially as a startup. All right, so let me just wrap up, and then we'll have more questions. So this is to teach the class here. So what I just showed you came out of my trying to teach the class kind of with relatively unsuccessfully for 2 or 3 years, and starting to put together a reader, and then getting better and better at it over time. It was pulling together all these different pieces. But I had to make it practical because you were coming into classes, and within one semester, I wanted you to take your idea and get to a point where you had a company. So it had to be really very clear as you go through it, so practical. And you had to know where the start was, know where the end was, but it had to meet the MIT standards of excellence and rigor. Yeah, we talked about this. You know, a business is about getting paying customers. That doesn't mean it's all about profit, but if you don't have a paying customer, you have no oxygen. Your body will die, your body being the organization. Now you can say, well, we're going to just get money from the government, where people are going to donate to us. That's not our approach. Our approach is you create value for someone, and someone will pay for that value, and then you create a sustainable business. You don't want to be, there's a whole edX class, which I could, you don't want to be driven by one customer, nor do you want to be sitting there playing with, you know, spreadsheets to say, oh, this is a huge market, and the mobile market, if we just get our, you know, app installed on 0.001% of the phones in the world, we're going to be rich. That never works. You have to know who your well-defined target customer group is. Know them very intimately. You have to know them economically, rationally, emotionally, socially, be able to finish their sentences, because then you develop a great product for one of them, and he tells somebody else, and now you have what's called word of mouth, or what's known today as virality. And that's what entrepreneurs need. They can't compete with the Procter & Gamble's, with the big budgets to sell things and having expensive salespeople. They need products that are so good that other people sell them for them. Entrepreneurship is not about generalities. It's about specificity. You gotta know exactly who the customers are. When you're locked in our classes, if you're talking about generalities, we just will push back on you. No, who exactly, what exactly feature, what exactly is the value proposition? All this stuff, by the way, is on an online course that I'll show you. It's an iterative process. You start and you kind of go, and then you get better and better at it. And it's an integrated system here. You can't see it, but this just shows you that there's a reason why we do the persona first, and we push to get the priorities, because that will dictate how you're going to determine what the quantified value proposition, and that will dictate how you're going to position yourself against the competition, and what is your core to support you being up here relative to the other people. That's a very fast pass through it. And entrepreneurship is not just about focus, which you mentioned. It's about moving fast. But if you move fast with focus, then you're like a dog chasing its tail. You have to incorporate learning every step of the way to get that spiraling innovation. And just, you know, and it's about action. This is not about sitting in class and reading books. You have to go out, you have to talk to customers, you have to do primary market research. And this is the point that that you brought up. Is it's about focus. I mentioned focus before. Steve Jobs said, I'm as proud of the things that we haven't done as the things that we have done. And that's disciplined entrepreneurship. That's why it's called disciplined entrepreneurship in one dimension. Do you have the discipline to not do things? Everybody likes to select markets. Tell me which markets you're deselecting. That's when the truth is. It's also called disciplined entrepreneurship for some other reasons. It works. You've just seen HubSpot that came out of our class. It's gone public. There's a whole bunch of other ones that have gone. Loku, you might know, was just sold for $70 million to GoDaddy. There's the book, and there's an online toolkit if you want to go through it for free. If you go to detoolbox.com, we could use some help on making that more robust. And there's an edX class, which was unbelievably popular. This is one of the things I'm the most proud of. Someone said the other day, last year he taught, I think maybe 1,000 people, if that. This past year he taught over 55,000 people, because when this MOOC came out, we didn't know what was going to happen, and it came out and it started 20,000, then the numbers usually go down from there. It went from 20,000, went to 55,000. There were people going to buildings in India and taking it as a group. I got the best emails from people saying, this is the first time I feel like I'm economically empowered ever in my life, because I understand what's going on. And I should have asked how many of you work with startups. But so entrepreneurship is now this off-the-charts thing. Governments, even the UK, is embracing entrepreneurship at the government level. But people don't really understand it. The first lesson you learn in engineering is to define your terms. What do we mean by entrepreneurship? And the interesting thing is entrepreneurship is that if you listen to Romney and Obama in the last campaign, like, they both were saying the word entrepreneurship, but they meant different things. What Romney was talking about is he was talking about what they call SME, small medium enterprises. These small companies, they make up the lion's share of the employment. And what Obama was talking about was innovation-driven enterprises or innovation-driven entrepreneurship. And these are two different things. When someone says, "Oh, my friend's an entrepreneur," they might, have a trading, or they might have a salon, or they might have a dry cleaner, or they might have a restaurant, or they might have a service company that services computers in a small area. That's a local business. That's a trading business. That's an SME. That's a small business that's dealing with a local demand. That is a good business, but it's not a high-growth business. The economy needs these.
Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program, the Founder Skills Accelerator, just to name a few. He came to MIT after 25 years with a highly successful track record in business. He directly raised more than $100 million in funding for his own companies and led to the creation of hundreds of millions of dollars in market value for these companies. He teaches a number of classes in entrepreneurship at MIT and was just last year awarded the Adolph Mandelson Prize for Entrepreneurship Mentoring at MIT. Finally, he has literally written the book on the topic, Disciplined Entrepreneurship, 24 Steps to a Successful Startup. We are absolutely delighted to welcome you to Sydney Pacific.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Julie. It's an honor to be here. Wow, what a nice place this is. Can you hear me in the back? You can probably hear me without this. Yes, this is an iPhone 6 Plus. And I won't sit on it to show you that it actually doesn't break. That's just not true. I've done it a few times. So, how many of you are engineers here? How many of you are from the School of Science? School of Management? And then Humanities, Arts, and Social Science. There's no hospital. Wow, that's scary. All right, so what I'm going to talk about is entrepreneurship, and I have, how long do we have? What?
We have half an hour.
Half an hour. Yeah, I would love to get a lot of questions. So if you have questions even before then, just shout them out. And I'm going to go through and just talk about MIT and entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship is this incredibly cool thing right now. Just like in the past 5 years when I've been running the center, we've gone from being kind of those crazy people over there, just leave them alone, to now President Reif, Marty Schmidt, Ian Waite, Dave Schmidtline, they come over and see us, they call up, and not only that, we have prime ministers come over and visit, we have Mayor Bloomberg come visit, we have Sam Zell come visit us, we have the White House wants to know what we're doing. It's kind of weird that we went from being these kind of pirates to being kind of in the Navy in a very short period of time. And the question is, kind of how did that happen? So when I graduated from college in 1980, yes, I am that old. You're supposed to say you don't look that old. Can someone please say that? Nobody was an entrepreneur. To say you were an entrepreneur meant you were unemployed. And today, 20% of the people at Harvard and Yale say they want to be entrepreneurs. If you go to Quebec, 25% of the young people want to be entrepreneurs. If you go to Georgia Tech, it's 33%. At MIT, it's 150%. You've got to start more than one company if you're really an entrepreneur. So we've gone in this period of entrepreneurship being statistically zero to being this very cool thing. And the reasons why are pretty simple. Does anybody know what the reason is? It's a 4-letter word. Free. No.
Job.
That's right. Not Steve Jobs, but jobs. Because the jobs that are being created are not being created by big companies. They're not being created by the government. They're being created by new companies. So everyone in this room will probably work for an innovation-driven startup at some point in their life. And if you don't, your kids certainly will, if you have kids. That's just the way the world's going. It's almost impossible not to work at a startup.
A PhD student in the biological engineering department, and both of us are the co-chair of the Committee on Scholarly Interaction, or CoSI for short. I'll let Georgia introduce CoSI.
Thanks, Wen. So we are excited to have you here for the third lecture of this semester. We like to invite speakers that are from the MIT community or outside to come talk about a topic that they're passionate about and that you can get excited about and engage in a discussion with them. So we're really excited to have someone here today that will talk about entrepreneurship and innovation. And before we begin, we'll ask Julie to introduce him. And Julie is the Associate Housemaster here at Sydney Pacific, and she's also a professor in the Aeronautics Department. So let's introduce Julie.
We are delighted today to welcome Bill Aulet. He's the director of the Martin Trust Center for Entrepreneurship at MIT. And their goal is to provide students at MIT the resources, the training, the mentorship to be able to commercialize the technology that you develop. There is arguably no better place in the country or the world to do this, and this is in large part to the outstanding leadership that Bill has brought in his role. He has conceived, designed, and helped implement a number of new innovation programs, the MIT Clean Energy Prize, the Regional Entrepreneurship